Let's kick things off with a number that is just absolutely mind-boggling. $8.8 trillion. That's the estimated annual cost that low engagement and burnout inflict on the global economy every single year. Just to put that into perspective, that's roughly 9% of the entire global GDP. So we're not just talking about a few people having a tough week at the office here. We're looking at a massive systemic crisis that is literally draining productivity, skyrocketing employee turnover, and honestly, just fundamentally breaking the modern workforce.
And you know what makes this crisis so incredibly dangerous? It's how invisible it often is. Like, you've probably heard the buzzword quiet quitting going around, but what we really need to be talking about is quiet cracking. This is silent burnout. Employees aren't staging dramatic walkouts or flipping their desks. They keep showing up, they sit through the meetings, they hit their targets. But underneath that perfectly functional surface, their mental health, their engagement, and their actual cognitive capacity are just crumbling. It's this slow subsurface erosion that no one notices until the foundation gives out entirely.
Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're going to completely reframe how we think about workplace stress. We're diving deep into the data, and honestly into the biology, to understand the American cortisol epidemic, why every U.S. professional is burning out silently. Because listen, we have got to stop looking at burnout as a personal failing or a lack of grit or individual resilience. The research definitively shows us that it's a measurable biological epidemic driven by systemic environmental factors.
So, here's our treatment plan for today's Explainer. We're going to map out the quiet cracking epidemic, dive into the actual biology of burnout, explore environmental multipliers like hustle culture, contrast burnout with moral injury, expose the care-washing trap, and finally, look at how we actually fix this by fixing the structural fit. Let's jump right in.
Starting with Section 1, the quiet cracking epidemic and the silent collapse of the American worker.
If you think burnout is just a problem for late career professionals who've been grinding for decades, well, think again. 74%. That's the percentage of Gen Z workers who are already experiencing at least moderate levels of burnout. Actually, they've officially surpassed millennials as the most burned out generation out there. We're literally watching a phenomenon where an entire generation is entering the workforce already running on empty. Peak burnout is now occurring at age 25. Let that sink in. That is a 17-year drop from the historical average.
So how do we spot this if it's so silent? Well, there are 10 pretty subtle warning signs to watch out for. It's rarely a dramatic missed deadline. Usually it's brain fog, where simple, everyday tasks suddenly feel like you're lifting boulders. It's emotional numbness, which is this total detachment from both the wins and the losses at work. You just kind of don't care anymore. It's a chronic fatigue that even a full weekend of sleep just cannot fix. And it bleeds into your life as increased cynicism, sleep disturbances, and even unexplained physical symptoms like random headaches or digestive issues. The really crucial point here is that silent burnout masks itself. Outwardly, the employee looks super steady, but internally, they're completely running on fumes.
Moving to Section 2, the biology of burnout. We're going to look at the endocrinology of exhaustion.
Because this all starts deep inside us with something called the HPA axis. This is essentially your body's biological engine for the fight or flight response. When you perceive a threat, your hypothalamus signals your pituitary gland, which then screams at your adrenal glands to release cortisol. This is actually a brilliant, ancient survival mechanism. It's designed to give you a massive burst of energy to, say, outrun a predator. The problem? Our modern professional environment literally has no off switch. We're dealing with constant digital connectivity, impossible overlapping deadlines, and endless Slack notifications that keep this primal alarm system permanently flipped on.
And burnout isn't just one static state. It's a biological progression. In the beginning, you enter a phase called hypercortisolism. You're insanely stressed out, sure, but you feel wired and strangely productive. Your body is just flooding with cortisol and you're crushing your to-do list, even though your sleep is probably starting to suffer. But here's the catch. Your body absolutely cannot sustain that pace. Eventually, the HPA axis just gets exhausted and you crash hard into hypocortisolism. Your endocrine system basically throws its hands up and says, "I'm out." This is the advanced stage of burnout, characterized by profound, persistent exhaustion, where your body literally loses the chemical capacity to mobilize energy.
When we look at the actual clinical data on this, it's pretty fascinating. Normally, right after you wake up, you get this healthy 50 to 75% spike in cortisol. That's your cortisol awakening response. It gets you out of bed. But look at a clinical burnout profile. That morning response is just completely flat. On top of that, the normal steep decline of cortisol from morning to night gets flattened out, which leaves you with high evening cortisol levels that absolutely wreck your sleep. In about 20 to 25% of clinical burnout cases, total daily cortisol secretion drops significantly. So long story short, burnout is quite literally rewriting your body's physiological baselines. And the physical damage that comes with that is severe. The main takeaway here is that burnout isn't just all in your head. Chronic cortisol elevation tells your body to halt anything it considers non-essential. It increases your blood sugar, skyrocketing your risk for type 2 diabetes. It suppresses your immune system, making you catch every bug going around the office. It literally causes structural atrophy in your prefrontal cortex, which perfectly explains that brain fog we talked about. It even forces your hair follicles into a shedding phase, a condition called telogen effluvium, where you experience massive hair loss months after a high-stress event. Our work environment is literally weaponizing our own biology against us.
All right, Section 3, hustle culture and meta-anxiety, or what I call the environmental multipliers of stress.
Look, you simply cannot talk about burnout without talking about financial fragility. 57% of U.S. employees right now are living paycheck to paycheck. This acts as this chronic, unavoidable background noise in people's lives. It's a persistent stressor that prevents any real physiological recovery, even when you're technically off the clock. When the cost of living constantly outpaces income growth, that financial anxiety creates a vicious loop that directly erodes workplace performance and completely eats up your cognitive bandwidth.
Which brings us directly to this staggering new concept, meta-anxiety. This is the acute fear of medical costs. According to recent data, 45% of employees have actively delayed getting medical care simply because they're terrified they can't afford it. So just think about that cycle for a second. The workplace stresses you to the point of literal biological breakdown, but your financial fragility makes you too afraid to seek the medical treatment you desperately need to fix it. It's a trap.
And then, of course, we pile hustle culture right on top of all that. We've moralized productivity. We are literally taught to believe that taking a break is a moral failure. We see stress bragging everywhere, where people treat severe sleep deprivation like it's a competitive sport just to prove their dedication. We're terrified of obsolescence, constantly looking over our shoulders, worrying that AI is going to steal our jobs tomorrow. And we enforce this brutal toxic positivity, demanding that everyone maintain this smiling, high-energy facade while they are internally collapsing. It's a total recipe for endocrine disaster.
Section 4. Burnout versus moral injury. This is what happens when the system betrays the professional.
So while burnout is typically defined as a mismatch between your demands and your resources, moral injury is an entirely different beast. It is a systemic trauma. It happens when structural or profit-driven constraints force a professional, think of a physician or a nurse, to deliver care that they know is inadequate, care that directly violates their deeply held ethical oaths. It produces immense guilt and a profound, lasting erosion of their professional identity. And let me be clear, you cannot fix systemic moral injury with a mandatory corporate yoga class.
Which leads us to Section 5, the care washing trap, and why surface-level wellness fails.
See, organizations today are actually spending more money on employee well-being than ever before, but employees, they aren't feeling it. And that's because of care washing. Care washing is when companies offer these surface-level perks, mindfulness apps, mandatory wellness seminars, free snacks in the break room that create a shiny veneer of caring but do absolutely nothing to reduce unrealistic workloads or fix toxic leadership. It completely misdiagnoses the problem. It treats burnout as an individual weakness, putting the burden of recovery entirely on the employee, rather than addressing the toxic, high-friction environment that's causing the stress in the first place.
Finally, Section 6, fixing the structural fit. This is the actual cure for the cortisol epidemic.
Here is the ultimate reframing we all need to internalize. Burnout is a fit problem, not a wellness problem. When the complexity of a job continually outpaces a person's cognitive capacity or their developmental stage, even the most capable, dedicated, highly trained individuals are eventually going to falter. This invisible gap between capacity and complexity creates chronic friction. So, to actually cure this cortisol epidemic, we have to stop trying to fix the individual worker. We have to start redesigning the system and the workload itself. So how do organizations actually pull this off in the real world? First, you need to implement a complexity gap diagnostic to make sure you aren't asking people to process way more complexity than they are currently equipped to handle. Second, establish structural autonomy. Give people real, genuine control over how and when they do their work. Third, leaders have to be well-being champions who actually model recovery, not just demand it while working 80-hour weeks themselves. Fourth, you absolutely must ruthlessly audit and eliminate the repetitive, low-value cognitive load that drains bandwidth for no reason. And finally, formalize your social infrastructure to combat the profound workplace loneliness that so often accompanies burnout. We have to reduce the daily systemic friction. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to really think about.
Is your company just offering wellness, or are they actually fixing the structural fit? The American cortisol epidemic is quite literally rewriting the biology of our workforce. Treating it requires an honest, hard look at the systems we've built, the workloads we relentlessly demand, and the cultures we tolerate. It's time to stop letting our workforce quietly crack and start building environments where human capacity can actually thrive. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Catch you next time.
If you want to analyze medical questions yourself in seconds, using evidence-based medicine principles, the link to the service is below the video.